Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to cover some of the toughest Blue Book questions out there. How do I know they're the toughest? Well, we have an online course at SupertutorTV. In this online course, students have the opportunity to import their Blue Book tests results by cutting and pasting it into our course. And then they get a whole data report on everything they missed, which questions, what category those are in, and they can click a button, create a custom study list on our course to then go and study and review all of the types of questions that they missed so they have a personalized plan of study. And so because we have all that Blue Book data, I compiled it and took a look at it and said, hey, what are the questions that students are missing most? And I will admit this data might be a little bit dirty, so to speak, because it's just my students as well as people using our online course who might be students who've watched more of our YouTube videos. There might be some things that those students tend to know that other students might not know. Maybe there's something I covered in a video that had a lot of views that they learned, so that might create differences, who knows? But in any case, I'm pretty sure these are some of the hardest questions on the SAT. Spoiler alert, these are from Blue Book official exams. So if you don't want to watch this video now, you could bookmark it, and after you've taken, I'm gonna be taking these from Blue Books 4, 5, and 6 today. After you've taken those 3 Blue Book tests, you can come back here and see if you solved them how I solved them, or if you're stuck on them and didn't get them right, because I know a lot of you are missing them. About over half of the students that we had take these exams missed these questions. You can come back here and review. We're going to start with Blue Book Test 4, and I'm going to cover this question in Module 1, which is kind of unique because most of the time the hardest questions are in Module 2. But on Blue Book Test 4, Module 1, question number 20, a lot of students missed. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So we got this question over here. A model created by biologist Louis Valente predicts that the rate of speciation, the rate at which new species form, so I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of as much unnecessary stuff, on an isolated island located approximately 5,000 kilometers from the nearest mainland. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these prepositional phrases just so I can hone in on it. Being triple the rate of speciation on an island only 500 kilometers from the mainland. So a model, and so I'm going to get rid of created by biologist here. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting it down to what I call the bare bones sentence. So what I'm trying to do is really isolate, like, what am I looking at so I can match up my subjects and my verbs. If I look down this list right now, I can see that there's a lot of different verb forms here. We have being, to be, to have been, and will be. So it could be verb tense, but it also could be verb form here as a being or to be. There's also like a to in here, right? So there's like some different stuff going on. A model predicts that the rate of speciation on an isolated island, and I could even get rid of this, that the rate of speciation blank triple the rate of speciation. It predicts that the rate of speciation being triple the rate of speciation. That doesn't work. Now, many of my students choose to be, and here's why they do that, because they omit the that. If I said a model predicts the rate of speciation to be, that would be correct. But when I read a model predicts that the rate of speciation, I need a main verb because this is a dependent marker that starts a new clause, essentially. So now I need another subject and another verb. And if I say to be, that's an infinitive phrase. It's not actually like a main verb in a sentence. So grammatically, it doesn't work. I can't say the rate of speciation to be triple the rate of speciation on an island only 500 kilometers from the mainland and get a complete clause, right? And in this dependent clause that starts with that, I have to have a subject and a verb unless the that is the subject. But that's not how this that is set up. It's not like that told him, right? The verb isn't conjugating with the that. It's not that to be. Doesn't even make sense. So the problem with to be, even though it works with predicts the rate of speciation to be, when you put the word that in there, it doesn't work anymore. And so this is out because of that word that. And so I'm going to come up with a tip here for you guys, is when you see the word that, or when you see the word which, these relative pronouns, circle them because they have then the requirement that you have a complete clause after them. So when you see those words, unless they're being used as determiners, like if I say that apple was tasty, right? It's a different way. I'm like saying that apple instead of the apple. So there's different ways to use that, but circle the that, investigate it, because the word that and missing that with your ear can be a way that you screw these up. And obviously the more you cross off in between that's intervening, the easier it is going to be for your ear to hear the rate of speciation, to be triple the rate of speciation is really weird. So that the rate of speciation to have been, also weird. That the rate of speciation will be. This is in main verb form, and so that works. We also know the word predicts is about the future, so it makes sense that we're in future tense. So that's why the answer here is will be. But like I said, I think the biggest thing that happens is there's so much intervening text. When you read it fast, your brain sometimes omits that, and then you're looking at to be because it sounds pretty good. And that will get you in trouble. So there you go. Beware of the that. Now we're going to jump to another question in Bluebook Test 4. And this one is kind of fun because my students tended to get this question wrong less often than students in general. So I'm excited about this question because it means it's something I teach very often, and so my students tend to get it right. So if you're not in my classes yet, maybe you want to join. This is a good kind of what I call low-hanging fruit question, meaning that it's easy to learn to get right if you know what's up. Okay, this is question 23 in Bluebook Test 4. The Arctic Alpine Botanic Garden in Norway and the Jardim Botânico of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil are two of many botanical gardens around the world dedicated to growing diverse plant species, both native and non-native, fostering scientific research, and educating the public about plant conservation. So anyone who's my student knows that if you see a semicolon in front of and this is a quick tip, guys, if you see a semicolon in front of and, most of the time, probably 95% of the time, you're looking at what we call a super comma. What is the super comma? It's when we use a colon like a comma because one of the interstitial elements that you're separating in your list has a comma in it already. But a secret trick to finding these really quickly is if you have a semicolon in front of an and. The other way you can find it is that you might have two things in the list and the semicolon might be between those. And this is one of the options, but they're already divided by a semicolon, and the semicolon is not dividing two complete thoughts, two independent clauses. Then that's dicey. There's only two ways to use a semicolon. We either use it the same as a period capital letter, or we use it as the super comma, and that means we're using it like a comma, and we use it because there are already commas hanging out, and we could get confused. And here's the commas hanging out, both native and non-native. You see that? This is a comma phrase, the offset, that's explaining what kind of species. It's a non-essential phrase that's let off with a comma, and so that's what we want. So essentially, we want both native and non-native, semicolon. And what's happening is we have three ing words here. So it is dedicated to, this is our lead off, right? And there's ing words, growing, diverse, blah, 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 fostering, blah, 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 and educating. And this is parallelism. We call this parallelism. When our three things in a list take the same form, if we have ing, typically if we're putting in a list, we want ing, right? We want that parallel structure, okay? And we have that parallel structure, so we know we have three things in a list. And we want to end this right here with a semicolon. Boom, okay? Growing diverse plant species, fostering scientific research, and educating the public about plant conservation. And this both native and non-native is removable, and that's why we're using the semicolon. But this is our tip-off right here that we're in the midst of a super comma usage. So when you see that semicolon and, be careful. We're in a super comma situation, and the answer is B. I can quickly speak to C. C doesn't work because everything after it is not a complete thought independent clause, right? We need to have subject, verb, and a complete thought on both sides of the semicolon if we're using it in that typical way where it's joining two independent clauses, and that's the only other way we can use it. And this is just a comma, and that doesn't work when we have the semicolon here. When we have that semicolon planted in front of the and, we have to use a semicolon for the other item in that list because we have three items in that list, all let off with that ing word. And there you go, the super comma. Enjoy. Now you are a semicolon master. The next question is a transitions question. So one of my favorite ways to approach transition questions, this is number 24, Bluebook test number 5. What I will say about transitions questions, my favorite way to do this is the number one thing that I have students do that's a mistake is when they read this, they just start to kind of feel out what sounds good and they roll with it and they keep moving. And what I like to do is actually go over here and analyze the relationship before the blank and after the blank first so that I really understand that relationship and then go over to the word. So I spent a little bit of extra time and hopefully that will help me anchor myself. A turtle shell appears external to the animal, protecting its body like armor. Blank the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton, a rigid outer casing like that of a crustacean or an insect, when in fact it is an endoskeleton. So this is a good clue. This is a good transitional clue. A turtle shell appears external to the body. It looks like armor. And then this says, it is assumed to be an exoskeleton. So I'm probably, this idea that it's external and like armor and this idea that it's an exoskeleton are actually similar, right? So I'm looking for a word. My perfect word I'm going to put here is like understandably. The shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton, right? Understandably, a rigid when in fact it is an endoskeleton, a part of the turtle's internal bone structure. So this transitions us to the idea that it is part of its internal bone structure, even though it looks like an external armor. So I'm looking for understandably. That being said is a little bit of, right? The shell is often, okay, so here I'm at a maybe. Then I have however, and my perfect word was understandably. However is a contrast signal, but the contrast really comes down here. If anything, I said this external armor is similar to this exoskeleton, right? So don't just plug it in and think blindly. Analyze what's over here, and then you're going to be able to nix things that really aren't working. For instance is when we have a claim that's broad and that we go down to something that's more narrow. But I don't think this is a for instance because it appears external to the animal protecting its body like armor. For instance, the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton, but I don't know that this is a broad claim and then this is an example of that claim. It's like a continuation, appears external like armor, thus the shell is often incorrectly assumed to be an exoskeleton. It's like, because this is like cause and effect, because this is what it looks like, people think this. So I don't like for instance, because I don't think we're going from a broad claim and then a specific example that supports that claim. And so I have that being said, which is a little bit like, even though that's true, I'm about to like go into something that's a little contrasty, right? But hence means thus. And I know some of you don't know what hence means, and that's why people get this wrong. And that's why this one is so hard. Hence essentially means thus, and that's pretty close to my accordingly, understandably, thus, cause and effect. And as I'm in here, I'm like digesting this, I'm analyzing, well, what is this? Is this statement and then narrower? No, this is evidence that people take and then they assume it to be an exoskeleton. Thus, they often assume this because they have this information. This is what people think, right? Because the thus. So hence is going to be correct. And you may have put that being said, and I get that that was my maybe, right? I was like, well, that's better than the other ones. But that being said, it really has some contrast to it. I don't want that contrast because I want the contrast to come here. External armor and exoskeleton are similar. I don't really want hesitation, that kind of vibe in between them. So the number one missed question in Bluebook Test 6 across my students and those on our online course is question 11, Bluebook Test 6, Module 2, hard. And this is Quant command of evidence. So with Quant command of evidence, I usually start over here. Which choice best describes data from the graph that support Ibanez and colleagues' conclusion? And then I'm going to figure out what their conclusion is. Although they found that climate change would negatively affect growth, they concluded that anthropogenic nitrogen deposition could more than offset that effect, provided the change is moderate rather than extreme. Whew. So I want moderate, not extreme, right? And I've got to understand this because I just read that. I don't know if you understood it, but I didn't. So I always have this policy of read when you need, because sometimes these are easy enough that I don't need to read everything, but I think I'm going to need to read everything. So first I'm going to try to orient myself to this graph a little bit. This says radial growth, and this says modeled radial growth of sugar maple trees. So we're looking at tree growth, and we have climate scenarios with nitrogen and without nitrogen. So this is like climate change and how much are our trees growing? And right now, this is our current situation with nitrogen. This is our current situation without it. This is moderate change in temperatures, and then we have this without nitrogen situation. But if there's extreme change, well, our trees are not growing a lot, right? The maple trees are in trouble. Inez Ibanez and colleagues studied a forest site in which some sugar maple trees received periodic fertilization with nitrogen to mimic the broader trend of increasing anthropogenic nitrogen deposition in soil. Ibanez and colleagues modeled the radial growth of trees with and without nitrogen fertilization under 3 different climate scenarios, the current, moderate, and extreme change. Although they found that climate change would negatively affect growth, they concluded that anthropogenic nitrogen deposition could more than offset the effect, provided that change is moderate rather than extreme. So what this means, anthropogenic is human. That's a stupidly confusing way to say human. Nitrogen deposition. So I'm assuming this is a really fancy way of saying humans adding fertilizer or nitrogen to the soil. So if we add nitrogen to the soil, periodic fertilization. If we fertilize the soil, the trees here grow more, right, than they would if we didn't have the nitrogen. And here they grow more than if we didn't have the nitrogen. And in fact, we're even better off here in moderate change than we are currently. If we just fertilize a little bit, we're going to get more tree growth than we would have right now if we didn't do the fertilizer. We're going to be able to make up for this downturn in growth from climate change, right? But if climate change gets really bad and our trees only grow this much, right, and we try to feed them nitrogen, we're still way down here. This is way below this black bar here. And what's interesting to me actually is these bars here, that nitrogen deposition with climate change is better than no nitrogen and no climate change, more than we have now, right? So we have growth with nitrogen under the current climate. Okay, growth with nitrogen under the current climate, that's the gray one, exceeded growth with nitrogen under moderate change, but the latter exceeded growth without nitrogen under extreme change. I don't think that's it. Growth without nitrogen under the current climate exceeded growth without nitrogen under moderate change, but the latter exceeded growth with nitrogen under extreme change. That's just comparing this, this, and this. That's just comparing this gray bar. You see that's this gray bar, weirdly, to those black ones. Growth with nitrogen under moderate change exceeded growth without nitrogen under moderate change, but the latter exceeded growth without nitrogen under extreme change. So that's saying this is exceeding these, right? This over here. This is really dizzying. Let's get to D, because I'm looking for what I'm looking for. I really wish we could compare this one to this one and say, oh, look, this is higher than even that, but this is bad. Growth with nitrogen under moderate change exceeded, yes, this gray bar, exceeded growth without nitrogen under the current climate. Yes, that's this black bar to that gray bar, what I wanted to get to, okay? So you see how if I go in knowing what I'm looking for, I'm in much better shape, because when I start to read all these, if I don't know what I'm looking for, oh my gosh, I'm all over the place. It's confusing, it's dizzying. But the latter, growth without nitrogen under the current climate, this one, exceeded growth with nitrogen under extreme change. Yes, those are the 3 bars I was on, you guys. That's what I'm looking for. So you can see how if I anticipate the answer a little bit, I can kind of figure this out. And I know which 3 bars are my key bars, right? 1, 2, 3. Those are the 3 bars that I really want. The rest of this jazz, and maybe I'll just erase all this so you guys can see better, right? The 3 bars that I really was talking about was this versus this. Oh yeah, this is like more exciting than that. And that's even with climate change. Great, so we can make up for it, but we can't make up for it over here. This bar is pathetic and it's lower than that, right? It doesn't make up for it. So those are my 3 magic bars. D has it. We have a winner. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you'd like me to explain more Bluebook questions, if this is interesting to you, please put a comment below this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you soon.